Yesterday we began Perikal Basar, and we're past the Mishnah on Kuf Dalid Omid Aleph. And the Gemara points out that there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction between the Reisha and the Seif of our Mishnah in what's called Diyukim Sosrim, a contradiction that arises from a meticulous reading of the Mishnah, because in the Reisha, the category of basar that's excluded is either basar of dagim or basar of chagavim, but the implication would be that oaf is included. And if we assume that the Mishnah is talking about a doraisa, then this is against Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that oaf is not considered basar. But yet, when we get to the Sefer, which is on the top here of Kuf Daled, the Mishnah says that if you take a neder that you won't eat basar, then you're allowed to eat dagim and chagavim. But the implication is, again, if we read it meticulously, that you're not allowed, you're enjoined from eating oaf. And that would imply that that oaf is considered basar. So let's read the Gemara. We'll see it inside. The Gemara is medayik from the Reisha ha'of asur midaraisa, that the Mishnah only excludes chagavim and dagim, implying that oaf is included in the Iser of basar of lo savashal gedi b'chalevim o keman de lo Rabbi Akiva dik Rabbi Akiva ha'omar chayvi oaf edom min Torah. So Rabbi Akiva understands that gedi refers to all categories of behema, but it doesn't include oaf. Ema seifa hanodim in a basar mutar b'basar dagim v'chagavim ha'of asur. Now, you might argue that Oaf Asur is very much consistent with the Reisha, because we medayik from the Reisha that Oaf is considered Basar. Now we could be medayik the same diuk from the Sefer that Oaf is Basar. But the problem is that when it comes to Neder, the determining factor in Neder is the das of the Noder, which is called hafla. Hafla means whenever you take a vow or a pledge, it depends on what you have in mind. And Rabbi Akiva, as we'll soon see, argues that when a person says, I won't eat meat, and he takes a neder to that effect, he has in mind the meat of a cow, of a bull, of a goat, of a sheep, but he doesn't have in mind fowl, the meat of chicken, of oaf. And yet, Rabbi Akiva, I'm sorry, let me backtrack a little. So, and Rabbi Akiva says that he has in mind even oaf. In other words, in his mind, even chicken would be included in his neder. And therefore, the Sefer of our Mishnah with regard to Noder, where the implication was that if he was Noder min basar, he's enjoined from eating oaf, that would reflect the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Now, let's understand Rabbi Akiva's logic in the case in Adar. How do you determine in objective terms what a person has in mind when he takes a neder? What's the litmus test? And we're not going to make it subjective and ask every individual, what did you have in mind? But rather, what did your language have in mind? And the determining litmus test, according to Rabbi Akiva, is the following. Let's say you sent an agent on a mission. For example, you told him to buy meat. And now he goes out into the market, this shliach, and guess what? There's no meat in the market, but he finds chicken. So what does he do in such a case? He goes back to the mishalech, to the person who sent him, and he asks him, what do I do? Should I buy chicken? And that would satisfy your mission, or should I not buy chicken because you wanted meat and not chicken? And Rabbi Akiva says in Masechet Nedarim that Kol mili de mimlach alei shliach bar minahu. The very fact that the shliach has to go back to the mishaleach and ask him, would you be satisfied with X because I couldn't buy Y, which you had explicitly sent me for, that indicates that X is included in Y. Otherwise, he would never even go back. Like, for example, if I told you to buy me meat and you only found vegetables, you found, let's say, lentils in the marketplace, you would not even bother going back and asking, well, should I buy lentils? Lentils is certainly not meat. But if all I could find was chicken, I would go back to you and ask you, would you be satisfied, with chicken? That indicates, according to Rabbi Kiva, that chicken is included in the expanded definition of basar, and therefore, with regard to Nedarim, the neder that he's enjoined from basar would also include oath. Because my litmus test is the fact that if I had sent you to buy basar and all you could find was chicken, then as a commissioned shliach, as your agent, I would have to go back to you and ask you, well, would you settle b'shas hadchak, if there's no meat, would you settle with my buying chicken? That indicates that chicken is somewhat related to the terminology of basar, and therefore it's included in the neder. The Chachamim reject Rabbi Akiva. Tisnan, we have a Mishnah. Let's see if he tells you. Nedarim Daf Nun Dalid. Hanodim in a Yerek. According to the Chachamim, muter bitluim. Right? I took a vow not to eat yerakos. Yerakos are what we call greens. Then I'm allowed to eat gourds, because they are not vegetables. That's a gourd. A dalat is not a yerek. However, Rabbi Akiva oser. Rabbi Akiva is going to argue that if you were a shaliach to go out and purchase greens, meaning yerakos, and all you could find is deluim, then in an expanded definition of yerakos, you would have to go back to the mishalech and ask him, well, would you settle for deluim if there was no other option? Which indicates that in the broader definition of yerakos, all-inclusive includes even diluim. Rabbi Kiva oser. So therefore, Rabbi Kiva says if a person takes a neder mina yerakos, the term yerakos that he accepted upon himself includes even a gourd, even telas. Like, for example, my wife makes chicken soup Friday night. And she uses, of course, the classic vegetables. You're talking about carrots and kishuim, and then she adds dalas. It adds a very nice flavor, right? That it's kind of like an orange color. So that would reflect the sheet of Rabbi Akiva that even dalas is bichlal, is included under the general category of yerakos. Omelo Rabbi Akiva, v'lo omer adam l'shlucho kach lanu yerek, v'hu omer lo matzasi el deluim. So the shliach who's commissioned to buy yerakos only found deluim, and he can't buy the deluim. He's got to go back. He's got to send a WhatsApp message to the mishaleach and ask him, "What do I do now?" Obviously, then deluim is not included in yerakos, meaning the fallback position is that, look, my friend, I couldn't buy yerakos for you. There were no yerakos in the shuk. should I buy Dluim? At least you'll be satisfied with Dluim. The very fact that he had to ask the question, according to the Chachamim of Rabbi Akiva, indicates that Dluim is not considered vegetables. Omolahen, whereas Rabbi Akiva responds to the Chachamim, Kain Adover, as we say in Yiddish, das idos. The very fact that he goes back and asks, well, can I buy Dluim for you? That indicates that Dluim is part of the definition of Yerakos. Because I'll prove it to you. Kluma omelo matzah el kitnius. Right? Let's say the shliach would only find lentils in the shuk, and he was sent to buy vegetables, greens. What would he even dream of going back to the mishalech to ask him? Well, would you want legumes? Legumes are not vegetables. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva says that if a person takes a neder on Yerakos, then Dluim would be included in his neder. Kitnios would certainly not be included, because since the shliach goes back to ask the mishalech, it means that it's in the, as we said before, the expanded definition, it's included. El shedlu b'chal yerek v'ein kitnios b'chal yerek. You can't even entertain the possibility. It shouldn't cross your mind that legumes could substitute for vegetables, and therefore, if the shliach can't find anything but kitnios, he's not going to even bother asking. Kitnios is not in the ballpark; it's not in the league. But if he finds dluim, then he's going to go back and say, "Well, would you settle for dluim? Because that's also a quasi vegetable." So now we go back to our Mishnah. We medayik from our Mishnah in the Reisha against Rabbi Akiva. The implication is that you cannot eat a combination of fowl of oaf with chalav, indicating that oaf is considered included in the doraisa of basar v'chalav. That's against Rabbi Akiva. But yet the Seifa that says, as far as neder is concerned, our diuk was that he would not, if he took a neder not to eat basar, he would not be allowed to eat oaf. That's Rabbi Akiva. So, make up your mind. The integrity of this Mishnah is being questioned because the ratio reflects the Shit Chacham against Rabbi Akiva, meaning that oaf is included in basar v'chalav, whereas the Seifa reflects the Shit of Rabbi Akiva. Now, the obvious answer to this question is that our Mishnah is neither Rabbi Akiva nor Rabbi Akiva. It's Rebbe. Rebbe authored the Mishnah. He was the last, the final editor of the Mishnah. And he may have accepted Rabbi Akiva with regard to one halacha and rejected him with regard to another halacha. So that's what's coming around the bend. Omer Rav Yosef, Rebbe he. Our Mishnah is not Rabbi Akiva, it's not the Chacham, it's Rebbe. And Nosiv Leah, leave it to Tanoi. Rebbe Paskins, according to the Tana that he likes, that he is Machriya Halacha Kamoso on one issue and another issue, and it might not be the same Tana. Whoever he thinks has got the right answer to the question. But in Nidarim, he accepted Rabbi Akiva's logic in Nidarim that if the Shliach has to go back to ask them Shalech, well, would you settle for X? Because I couldn't buy Y. That means that X is included in the neder, in the expanded definition of Y. But with regard to b'basar b'chalav, savalak Rabbanan, he holds like the Rabbanan that oaf is considered basar and it's b'chalal. But the truth is, Rabbosai, that as much as I appreciate and applaud Rav Yosef's answer, I happen to personally prefer Rav Ashi's answer. Rav Ashi says, Kula Rabbi Akiva, which is great for me because I assume that there's no iser of basar, of chalav and oaf b'chalav on a doraisa level. We're going to go through the sugya Mitzvah Shem today about what you could put on the table, and you're not supposed to put milchiks and fleishiks on the same table. But what happens if it's only oaf? The Gemara clearly thinks that oaf is on a lower level, so therefore we're going to accept the foul. That Hachikamer, let's interpret the ratio of the Mishnah in such a way that it coincides with Rabbi Akiva. How so? Kol habasar osel levashel b'chalav mehem midivrei Torah mehem midivrei Sofrim. The Mishnah was not entering into that distinction and categorizing Doraisa versus Rabbanan. So that when the Mishnah implies that oaf with cholav is prohibited, that's on a derabanan level. And even Rabbi Akiva accepts that there's such a great similarity, and we saw it in the Nedarim, between oaf and basar, that we have to be very careful. If you're going to allow a person to eat chicken with milk, he will come to eat meat with milk. Doesn't make that distinction. So therefore, the Mishnah in the Reisha could reflect the Shita of Rabbi Akiva as far as oaf is concerned, but on the Darabanan level. And the only thing that the Rabbanan would permit is basar, dagim, v'chagavim. She'ena midivrei Torah v'lo midivrei sof. There's no Easter whatsoever. But both, I'm getting a little scared. Did we do this already yesterday? Am I doing the same daf? No. Okay. Just because I seem to recall that I mentioned to you yesterday about the Sephardic minhag, about not eating cheese. Yes, this is where I would have made my comment. So anyway, let's just summarize. According to Rav Ashi, the Mishnah is very smooth. Both the Reisha and the Seifa coincide with Rabbi Akiva. The Reisha coincides with Rabbi Akiva to prohibit milk with chicken on a Drabanan level. The Seifa says with regard to Nedarim, chicken is included in the broader definition of basar, and the person who took a neder not to eat basar is enjoined from eating chicken. Okay, now we get to the issue of what you're allowed to put on the table and what you're not allowed to put on the table. Also lahalos. So we said that basar and gvina, meat and cheese, cannot be put on the same table, but we couldn't care less about fish or about grasshoppers, chagovim. Now, we're going to have to make a distinction between a smorgasbord and a table from which you eat. A smorgasbord table means we put food on the table, but we don't eat off that table. We have our own tables. So the table is really just a place where you put the food. Then you have people sitting around a table and the food is put on the table. You eat from the table itself. In any event, the big to-do here in this sugya is that, again, with our diuk in the Mishnah, it seems that the only case that you're allowed to put together with cheese on the same table is locusts and fish. But the implication is that oaf, you would not be allowed to put on the same table with cheese. I'm going to derive from this the opposite conclusion of what we mentioned in the name of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi had said that oaf becholav is only derabanan, reflecting the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. But Rav Yosef is going to make a diuk that if there's an iser halah to place on the table together with cheese, oaf, that must mean that oaf is doraisa. Why? The isal kedat derabanan. If you're going to tell me that the only reason halachically that I'm not allowed to eat chicken with milk is because the Rabbanan made gzeira, but actually on a doraisa level, when the Torah says gidi, it does not include oaf. If that be the case, we have a problem of gzeira l'gzeira, achila gufa gzeira. If you were to eat, in the worst case scenario, you ate the chicken that's on the table together with milk, something that's unimaginable to us, but let's say he went ahead and he did it, maybe inadvertently. That itself is only d'Rabbanan. I mean, Rabbi Yosef is trying to prove that this is illogical, and it can't be so. But if you would raise the possibility that eating oaf with cheese would be d'Rabbanan, and therefore we might be afraid that he'll eat it and violate a d'Rabbanan, anan nigzar halah otu achila. Now we're going to say, don't put the oaf and the cheese on the same table because you might come to eat it. And even in the worst case scenario, if I eat it, I'm only violating an Issa D'Rabbanan. That's called Gzeira L'Gzeira. Now, Rav Yosef has to prove to us that the Rabbanan don't piggyback one Gzeira on top of another. How do I know this? Disnan, we have a Mishnah in Masechta Chala. So Chala is not part of Daf Yomi. but it sneaks in here in Chullin because the Gemara distinguishes between Chalas Eretz Yisrael and Chalas Chutz La'aretz. Chalas Eretz Yisrael is Doraisa, and that's in Parsha Shlach. However, in Chutz La'aretz, there's no din of Chala on a Doraisa level. The whole entity of Chala and Afrashas Chala in Chutz La'aretz is all D'Rabbanan. Now the question is going to become, after I'm mafresh Chala, and this Chala is prohibited to a non-Kohen, can I invite a non-Kohen to eat on the table, on the same table, with Chalas Chutz La'aretz? Again, if it's going to be Chalas Eretz Yisrael, which is biblical, then for sure I'm not allowed to put Chala on the table, which is only permissible to a Kohen, and invite a non-Kohen to eat from the same table because we're afraid that he may forget himself and accidentally eat that Chala, which is a very severe Issa. And if I'm not mistaken, Zar she'achal Chala zachiv misa b'dei shamayim, very severe Issa. But let's say I'm in Chutz La'aretz, and I've got Chalas Chutz La'aretz. Can I invite a non-Jew where even in the a non-Kohen, where even in the worst case scenario, if the non-Kohen would partake of that Chalas Chutz La'aretz, he violates the D'Rabbanan. And once again, we're getting into Gzeira L'Gzeira, because the whole reason we can't put the Chal on the table and invite the non-Kohen is because he might come to eat it. And even if he comes to eat it on a D'Oraisa level, he hasn't done anything terrible. It's Chalas Chutz La'aretz, but he would violate an Issa D'Rabbanan. So you're making a Gzeira, don't put it on the table lest he might come to eat it. And eating itself is a Gzeira because he might come to eat Chala D'Oraisa. That's a Gzeira L'Gzeira. And Disnan Chalas Chutz La'aretz.